We are about to start again after the coffee break with our keynote speech. So please be seated. So I have the honor to introduce to you Ambassador Hans Brattskar, the permanent representative of Norway to the UN in Geneva. Prior to this current assignment, Ambassador Brattskar was Special Advisor on Forest Sustainable Development with the UNDP. He was also State Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Oslo. And Ambassador Brattskar has served as Norwegian ambassador to Kenya and Sri Lanka and many other posts. The reason, of course, why we have Ambassador Brattskar here today is for today's keynote speech is because of his role as president of the 4th review conference of the Mine Ban Convention that took place in Oslo 2 weeks ago. And the people who follow this theme, and many of you will, and also some of you were present in Oslo, they will agree that that the ambassador and his team did a fantastic job. Because the review conference generated a strong, unanimous political declaration and also a very detailed implementation action plan, the Oslo action plan, and also a review document. And the meeting also confirmed the norm, the legally binding norm against anti-personnel mines. Apart from these very strong outcome documents, it was also, I would say, a heartening gathering that demonstrated what can be done if governments and civil society work together and join forces, and also listen to the voices of the victims of anti-personnel mines. So, let's say, with the many challenges and difficulties we are facing today with regard to arms control, I think it's necessary to not forget about the successes and the great things that happen and have happened, can happen if we put our shoulders collectively under multilateral disarmament. So, Ambassador Brattskar, I want to thank you and also give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Frank, and a very good morning to all of you. And I'm very happy to be here with you, also to thank so many of you and your institutions or countries for being in Oslo and helping us make it a successful review conference with, I think, a quite important outcome. It was 2 weeks ago, as we heard, that the conference happened, but we have been working very hard, of course, over the full year that I have been president of the Mine Ban Convention. And then also the torch was passed to Sudan, but it's, I think, very appropriate to come here with and meet so many good friends and then to brief you on the outcomes of the Oslo Review Conference and say a little bit about how I see the road ahead for the global mine action in a protection perspective. But before I go into details about the outcomes of the conference, namely the Oslo Action Plan and the Oslo Declaration, please allow me to put these documents into a greater perspective and add some context as well first. Anti-personnel landmines are a problem that affect all regions of the world, including us here in Europe. And sadly, landmines are not a problem of the past. The Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention was adopted in Oslo in 1997 and came into force on March 1st, 1999. That means that we celebrated the 20th anniversary of the entry into force of the Mine Ban Convention earlier this year. Every 5 years, the states parties to the convention meet for a review conference. The purpose of the review conference is to take stock of the progress in implementing the convention and to stake out a course for the next 5 year period. This year, we have therefore had ample opportunity to reflect on what has been achieved and also on the remaining challenges. First of all, and I'd like to stress that, we have much to be proud of. The Mine Convention should be regarded as one of the most successful multilateral disarmament treaties of recent times. 164 states parties and a thriving network of international and regional organizations, as well as civil society actors, work towards a shared goal of a mine-free world. This thriving network was very much visible in Oslo during the review conference, with more than 600 delegates representing states, civil society, including, and I stress this, including mine survivor networks, as well as international and regional organizations. The convention has established a strong norm against any use of anti-personnel landmines. This norm is adhered to by more than the 164 states parties. For example, the annual UN resolution on the convention is supported by more states than there are states parties. Virtually every state, even those that are not state parties to the convention, have stopped producing anti-personnel mines, and many states have put in place moratoria on the use, production, or transfer of mines, even though they are not full members of the convention. Over the past 2 decades, more than 4.6 million anti-personnel mines have been removed from the ground. Almost 53 million stockpile mines have been destroyed and will therefore never be used. We do, of course, do not know how many lives the Mine Ban Convention has saved, but we know this. Every single mine destroyed potentially represents somebody's foot, someone's arm, or someone's life that could have been lost to a landmine. Protecting people's lives and limbs from landmines is at the heart of the Mine Ban Convention. But there is more, because when land is cleared of mines, it is released back to communities and can be used for productive purposes. Over the past 20 years, at least 2,880 square kilometers of mined land has been cleared. That land can now safely be used for agriculture, infrastructure, trade, schools, or health clinics. It is becoming increasingly clear that mine action is vital to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, including the commitment of leaving no one behind. The Mine Ban Convention broke new ground as the first disarmament treaty to recognize the needs of mine survivors. That recognition, in turn, helped pave the way for other disarmament treaties and for them to ensure the rights and needs of victims, and also to highlight the rights of persons with disabilities in society in general. Over the past 20 years of implementing the convention, the rights of victims and survivors have been recognized, and assistance has been provided to many with the aim of ensuring that victims can lead full and equal lives and with dignity. We can celebrate that 31 states parties to the convention have successfully finished clearance and have been declared mine-free. These are truly amazing achievements. In a time when we often hear from our colleagues in the disarmament community that international disarmament norms are under pressure, it is important to remind ourselves of the success of the Mine Ban Convention. The norm established by this convention is strong, and we must work hard to ensure that it continues to be so in the future. And from what I heard from many discussions in the Oslo Review Conference, states parties are strongly committed to doing their part to achieve this. That is very encouraging, and we must continue to encourage that commitment. Norway has been a strong supporter and a consistent partner in mine action since before the Mine Ban Convention was adopted in 1997. Humanitarian mine action continues to be a priority for my government. One of the key priorities for for my presidency of the Mine Ban Convention this year was to bring renewed political attention to mine action as a key protection activity and to assure the continued relevance of the Mine Ban Convention. I was encouraged to see a long list of states take the floor to renew their political commitment to the Mine Ban Convention during the review conference 2 weeks ago. Such renewed political commitment is vital because sadly, and despite all our successes, landmines are not, as I said early on, a problem of the past. Overall, we have seen a clear trend of declining numbers of casualties due to landmines in most countries since the convention entered into force. But in several countries affected by armed conflict, Afghanistan, Libya, Nigeria, Syria, Yemen, Ukraine, as well as Myanmar, there has been a significant increase in the number of recorded casualties since 2014. In 2018, landmines and explosive remnants of war caused nearly 7,000 registered deaths and injuries. And the vast majority of these casualties were civilians. More than half of all civilian casualties, where age was known, were children. These are rather dramatic numbers, and they remind us of what our joint purpose as a mine ban community is: to put an end to human suffering caused by anti-personnel mines. Each victim is, of course, one too many. In recent years, we have witnessed new and widespread use of improvised landmines. Many of these are produced and used as tools of war by non-state actors. While improvised landmines themselves are not a new concept, the scale of the problem is. And let me be very clear. Anti-personnel mines are prohibited, and all obligations of the Mine Ban Convention apply, no matter whether a mine is manufactured or improvised. The Oslo Action Plan and the Oslo Declaration make this very clear. This is important because if we want to protect people effectively, we must address new contamination through effective mine action, while not losing sight of mine contamination from old conflicts. 32 states parties still have landmine contamination and clearance obligations in line with the convention. Unfortunately, we may see a few more states rejoin this list over the next few years as a result of new landmines laid by non-state groups. Nigeria is an example of such a state. Nigeria was able to declare itself mine-free in 2011 in advance of its deadline under Article 5 of the Convention. But now, following the new use of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature by non-state groups, they are discovering in Nigeria new anti-personnel mine contamination, and they gave an initial update on this challenge during the Oslo Review Conference. At the previous review conference in Maputo in 2015, states agreed to an ambitious goal of intensifying their efforts to complete their time-bound obligations as soon as possible and to the fullest extent possible by 2025. If we are to reach this goal, the pace of survey and clearance of mines worldwide must increase. Because worldwide, 60 million people still live with the risk of landmines. In many ongoing conflicts, mine action is required for delivery of humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, and to create the conditions for the safe and voluntary return of refugees and displaced persons. We know that many people displaced by recent conflicts will be returning to heavily mined areas. In recent years, large new groups of refugees and internally displaced persons have therefore come to count them among the many groups at risk for anti-personnel mines. This, taken together with the higher number of casualties and the fact that many of the people who are at risk find themselves in areas where mine clearance may not yet be possible due to conflict and insecurity, has led the mine ban community to look closer at what else we can do to protect these people and to prevent new accidents. One important part of the answer to that question is providing increased attention to effective and targeted mine risk education and other risk education measures to all affected, or for all affected people. When all landmines have been cleared and all stockpiles have been destroyed, landmine victims and survivors will still have to live with the legacy of landmines for the rest of their lives. The states parties to the Mine Ban Convention are committed to ensuring the full, equal, and effective participation of mine victims in society, based on respect for human rights, gender equality, and non-discrimination. Achieving that goal means that healthcare, rehabilitation, and socioeconomic inclusion services must be made available to mine victims and survivors. As we focus on protection, we must understand who is most affected by landmines and how. We know that risk patterns vary for girls, boys, women, and men, with young boys often being at the highest risk of becoming a casualty. People in affected communities also have other diverse needs and experiences, based, for example, on their age, living with a disability, speaking a different language than the majority, belonging to indigenous peoples communities, or a range of other diversity factors that affect risk patterns and how they benefit from mine risk education activities. In other words, to be effective, we must apply a gender and diversity perspective in all parts of our work in order to ensure protection for all. This is true in all parts of mine action, including victims' assistance, mine risk education, and indeed mine clearance. So this is the backdrop against which 600 delegates from the states parties, civil society, international regional organizations met in Oslo for the fourth review conference. The goal for the review conference was threefold. First, to take stock of the progress in implementing the convention since the last review conference that was held in Maputo 5 years ago. Second, to identify remaining challenges that need to be addressed. And my speech until now has addressed these two first items. Let me now turn our attention to the third and most important goal of the conference, namely to agree on the actions state parties will take in the next 5 years in order to implement all parts of the Mine Ban Convention. The review conference adopted two key outcome documents in this regard: the Oslo Action Plan and the Oslo Declaration, a political declaration on a mine-free world. The Oslo Action Plan sets out 50 concrete actions states parties will take over the next 5 years in order to make tangible progress towards ending the suffering caused by anti-personnel mines. It is an ambitious plan, and I believe it will give new energy to the implementation of the Mine Ban Convention and therefore make a significant contribution to protecting people, be they girls, boys, women, or men. An ambitious action plan is important, but it needs to be accompanied by a clear political commitment in order to be successfully implemented. The Oslo Declaration, the political declaration, emphasizes precisely that joint political commitment to end the suffering and casualty caused by anti-personnel mines and to strengthen efforts in order to achieve the goals of a mine-free world where survivors and victims are fully and equally included. With this political commitment, I believe we have a good foundation for the implementation of the Oslo Action Plan. What then are the action states have committed to take over the next 5 years? In the Oslo Action Plan, states agree that it is necessary to increase the pace of survey and clearance of mined areas over the next 5 years if we are to reach the goal of a mine-free world by 2025. All countries will precisely identify mined areas and put in place national plans for mine clearance in accordance with international standards within the next 2 years. The Oslo Action Plan also confirms and emphasizes that all obligations of the Mine Ban Convention also apply to anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, meaning that such mines must be reported, surveyed, and cleared just like all other anti-personnel mines. In response to the situation where more attention is needed to provide effective, targeted, and gender-sensitive mine risk education, the Oslo Action Plan contains a whole chapter on mine risk education and other risk education measures. Here, states parties commit to providing context-specific mine risk education programs to all affected populations and groups at risk. They will also ensure that such programs are integrated with wider humanitarian and development. I believe these actions will contribute to reducing the number of new mine accidents and also to protect displaced persons who are returning to their homes. Even if we succeed, as I hope, in reducing the number of new accidents, those who have already fallen victim to landmines must not be forgotten. In the Oslo Action Plan, states parties with victims in areas under their jurisdiction or control will agree to do their utmost to provide appropriate, affordable, and accessible services to mine victims on an equal basis with others. The Oslo Action Plan contains a number of concrete action states will take in order to ensure that people who have been injured by mines have access to healthcare and other services they need to be able to live as full and equal members of society. Of course, the state parties recognize that further efforts must be made to universalize the convention. The Oslo Action Plan commits them to spare no effort to continue to universalize the convention and to further universalize and strengthen the norm against the use of any anti-personnel mines. The action plan also contains clear actions that states will have to, who still have stockpiles, or states that might discover previously unknown stockpiles, and that happens, will take in order to comply with the stockpile destruction obligations. With only 6 more years to go before the 2025 goal, the Oslo Action Plan recognizes the need for sufficient resources to get the job done. State parties agree to do their utmost to commit the resources needed to meet convention obligations as soon as possible, and they will explore all possible alternative and maybe even innovative sources of funding. And this is an important point, as currently only a small number of countries representing or are responsible for 70% of the funding for global mine action. 70% and just a few countries. We would like to see many more countries become donors, and we would like to see increased cooperation and learning between mine-affected countries, as well as increased national financial commitments from mine-affected states themselves. Experience shows that in-country-based dialogues between national authorities, operators, and donors can significantly improve progress towards a country's completion and its obligations. The combination of strong national ownership and cooperation and assistance is a powerful model that is recognized in the Oslo Action Plan. State parties commit to ensuring strong national leadership and to consider establishing national platforms for regular dialogue among all stakeholders. The Oslo Action Plan contains a commitment to following a number of best practices when it comes to developing evidence-based work plans that follow international standards and take gender considerations and other diverse needs and experiences of people in affected communities into account. We know that these are some of the ingredients of progress and of success. Importantly, the Oslo Action Plan contains a commitment from donors to support plans that do take these best practices into account. The Oslo Action Plan mainstreams gender and other diverse needs through all parts of the implementation of the convention, and states parties will be reporting on how they take these considerations into account. As I said earlier, this is an important part of making mine action effective, and I'm therefore very happy that the Oslo Action Plan and the declaration both stress this important point. Finally, the Oslo Action Plan introduces a whole new level of accountability through the inclusion of indicators for each action. State parties will report on these indicators each year. In this way, we will be able to track our progress from year to year. The Oslo Action Plan will be an important tool on the road to a mine-free world over the next 5 years. Priority number 1 will now be to ensure that no time is lost in implementing the action plan. While the action plan is the document of the state's parties, there is no doubt that strong partnerships with civil society, the United Nations, and other international and regional organizations will be absolutely vital in order to realize the common goals of the state parties for a mine-free world. Throughout this past year, I have encouraged a broader engagement between the mine action community and the wider humanitarian and development community. I believe we need to continue down this path in order to ensure the effective implementation of the Oslo Action Plan and to realize the links between the Mine Ban Convention and the Sustainable Development Goals. We need renewed and sustainable political commitment to implementing the Mine Ban Convention if we are to reach our goals. The Oslo Review Conference allowed states and organizations alike to pledge their political commitment to the convention over the next 5 years. And this is an important starting point in order for us to step up our joint efforts to implement the Oslo Action Plan and to make significant progress towards a mine-free world. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Yes, I want to give the floor to Jacek Belica.
Thank you very much, and thank you for not overlooking me, Mr. Chairman. But Ambassador Brattskar, I wanted to really make 2 points. One is about EU support for this convention. And as you know, all 28 EU member states are parties to this convention in good standing, although it has taken some time, I admit. I mean, it's a history which always influences these choices. There are defense communities in our member states. Countries are different, have longer borders, unprotected, historically vulnerable, and so on. But these humanitarian considerations in the end prevailed. And the EU and EU member states are now very staunch supporters and involved also in all aspects of mine action. So its funding goes from member states, but funding also goes from various EU budgets, and we are talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of euros now, go to mine clearance, to stockpile destruction, but also to mine risk awareness education, to victims assistance. And here I want to make the second, and I consider very important point, that with under your leadership, Norway in this review conference has really shown the human face of our work, the human impact. We quite often, also in this community, I admit, and I discuss it sometimes with my colleagues, we are often involved in, drafting of documents, in sort of checking of formalistic, legalistic approaches, and to fight over commas in statements, and look for figures in budgets and so on. But here, within this conference, and also by showing the survivors, you have shown that security is also human security, that it's not just national security, not international security, but it really has all impact on the ground. The pictures of children playing next to the minefields of survivors and so on. So I hope I am not abusing here the privileges of the co-host of this event in asking all participants to stand up and give a standing ovation to the work that Norway and you personally have done in this conference.
thank you for complying with the wish of my boss. And also, of course, there are two more questions. There is not really a question round, but still there is room for two questions. First, Mr. Rocca, Mario Rocca.
Yes, Mario Rocca, University of Geneva and Union of Scientists for Disarmament of Italy. Thank you for this very nice overview about the landmine treaty. However, my question is, which are the nations which are still not adhering to this treaty? Because this is a very nice story, a very positive story of Europe, but as far as I remember, United States and also the other major powers did not sign it. Is it still the case, or has there been some evolution?
And then a question by Sigurd Schjelstrate from Belgium.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Brattskar. I think the Mine Ban Convention is a shining example of what the UN Secretary General calls disarmament that saves lives. Now, there are, of course, challenges, and there is a certain paradox in the sense that the success of the convention has led actors to use not anti-personnel mines that are produced, because there are very few producers, but they are using improvised explosive devices. And the Oslo REFCON was very important in considering this issue. In fact, these IEDs have become the scorched earth strategy of our days. If one looks at how Daesh has mined houses, private houses in Iraq and Syria, in all kinds of terrible ways. If you then see that Iraq still has more than 1 million IDPs, that's a result of this scorched earth strategy, which is based on the use of IEDs. So we really need to look at how we address this issue, how we can counter diversion of certain components that can serve as precursors for IEDs. And we have to also make the link more and more, I think, with development, with the fact that mine action is a enabler of development and post-conflict reconstruction. And so we are very happy that UNDP is going back into the mine action game, and we were wondering if you would have share some thoughts on this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for the very kind words from the special envoy. I'm very grateful for that. But I like to stress that we saw our presidency as very much a joint effort where we worked very closely with both the EU and member states and many others, and engaged civil society also in a very meaningful way. And I think that the work over the whole year that we did together was really the reason why it became so successful. There's the outcome in Oslo. First of all, on countries not members, I mean, there are 164 state parties that are members, and we have 193 members of the United Nations. A shared goal for us is also always to increase the number of members. But I think, as I stressed in my statement, although I like to see all countries as members of the convention, of course, it is a huge part of the success of the convention that even the major powers that are not members of the convention respect the norms of the convention. And I think that's very important to remember that. And you know, Norway is the 5th largest contributor financially to mine action, but the large and others represented around the table here are higher than us. But don't forget that the United States is by far the largest financial contributor to mine action around the world. They participate in the meetings, as do other non-members of the convention. We also had, I should mention that, we had the presence of Myanmar, which is a country with great challenges and concern when we talk about landmines. We encouraged them to participate in Oslo. They did. Syria was represented as well in Oslo. And what we say to some of these countries that you know, we would like all members of the United Nations to be members. If it's not possible to become a member in the short term, please do what you can to approach the convention. Engage with other other countries in a discussion about how you can approach the convention and to become a full member. But I think it's very, very important when I talk about the success of the convention, we have to really look at the norms that have been established and the way they are respected. Very, very few places on this earth would, I'm not talking about non-state actors, but a country will produce landmines. Very, very few. If you go back 20 years, 25 years, this was commonplace, and people would say it would be impossible to get the acceptance for such a norm because we need these, and I've been posted in countries where this has been said, we need these weapons now. It's unthinkable for most countries, members or not members of the Mine Ban Convention, to produce, to trade, or to deploy landmines. And I think that is something we need to celebrate. As far as the Mine Ban Convention being an enabler for development, yes, absolutely true. I did mention that as well in my intervention. I see the convention as very much a protection issue. This is something that protects for the protection of civilians. It's a humanitarian issue, but it's also something that's very closely connected to development. And you see that in many countries. Some of them I visited during my presidency as well, how much they look at mine clearance and mine action in general as an enabler for development. And this is the way they can explain to their populations as well why they have to put their own financial resources into mine clearance and mine action in general. And if you look at some of the Sustainable Development Goals, health, for example, very much closely connected to this. Education is another issue, rights of disabled people and so forth. But I think if you can make that connection, and if you go to affected countries, they very much would like to listen to and be listened to, how they connect this work to development. But I think also, for my own sake, if you look at my country as a donor country, we might have to emphasize that more as well as we look at to secure future financing to connect it to the Sustainable Development Goals in a more visible way, if you would like.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we close the session.